And then I always like to ask people what kind of wildlife sightings, bird sightings, or otherwise that they've seen around town. Some of this is nice to know with the Christmas bird count coming up, but it doesn't have to be birds. In fact, I want to know what you saw for whales, Dave.
It was quiet. Yeah, very different than previous years. It was,
so there's no bills?
You had that one at Sheep Point, and we saw one there, and then the Montague after us had 3 in that area. But in Port Ravine, I saw 1 blow. And that was it. And that deep trench that usually has all the herring, wintering herring, and whales on it just wasn't there. There were some sea lions, a scattering of birds. And closest interesting thing to town was a yellow-billed loon near Bomb Point. That was nice. We need to
not close enough for the count.
Well, we need to send somebody out in a skiff the day before and bird it into the count circle.
Yeah. And do other people in here who don't know what the Christmas bird count is, especially some of you that are new to town? Does everyone know what the Christmas bird count is? Anyway, it's been going in this town for a long time. For a small rural town, it's close to 30 years, I think, that this circle has been run. And it's awesome. Our circle's neat because it includes mountains, it includes the delta, it includes all the Eak Lake, and there's even 2 boat routes. And then we'll try to get people on whatever they want to do, but we'll try to distribute people as best we can as well. The boat routes can get things like loons and marbled murrelets and all these neat seabirds. And anyway, there's quite a variety of habitat. Robert?
I saw 2 Johnny woodpeckers in the last 4 days, so there might be some seen on the count.
Yeah, we can go a while without seeing those. Anybody else? Out when I've seen whales and also been trolling for winter kings here lately, there's a decent number, I mean a fair scattering of ancient murrelets, which we don't see all the time. Did you see any of those on your trip?
No, for them. See any Bonaparte gulls and Simpson again this fall.
Bonaparte?
Bonaparte gulls and Simpson. It's starting to get a standard fall stop for them.
There's still kittiwakes around, right?
Yeah, there were some kittiwakes.
Yeah.
We'll see if they're still here for count all the time they take off.
This is the year for it.
Yeah.
Bob?
Saw some kind of waxwing across from the hospital in those mountains.
Oh yeah, and I saw a robin fly by there not too long ago.
There were 14 great blue herons on the breakwater yesterday across from the science center. That was pretty wild.
Well, cool. Anyway, if you see anything neat like that, give me a call or stop me on the street. I do try to keep a list of interesting bird sightings around here, and some of that does come into play for the Christmas bird count. You know, we can sometimes pick up neat species just because of some neat bird that somebody stumbled into. So anyway, I welcome those little tidbits. Next, we'll get to the speaker. And I know somebody's been working really hard on this for the last week or so. This is Charlotte Westing. She's our area biologist with Alaska Department of Fish and Game. She's been here a year and a half now and replaces Dave Crowley, if some of you remember Dave Crowley. And she came from Kotzebue. She and her husband lived in Kotzebue, in Dillingham, and many other parts of Alaska. But anyway, she's going to talk to us about black bears in Prince William Sound.
Well, I chose black bears as my topic tonight because black bears in Prince William Sound were something that people immediately started talking to me about as soon as I showed up on the scene here. So I want to talk to everybody about basically what I've learned about black bears in Prince William Sound from talking to people and looking over the data, and then also just share some different changes that are probably on the horizon. Okay. So first I'll talk a little bit about the life history of black bears in Prince William Sound, then I'll talk about the importance of black bears to the ecosystem and the economy. Give you an idea of what our best guesses are for population estimates, and then describe how the user landscape has changed over time, particularly with the access to the Whittier Tunnel by light vehicles. I'll talk about some of our management objectives, our regulatory history, the different changes that we've made over time to try to make some adjustments to harvest, and then go over the harvest data, what it's telling us, the direction of some of our future research, and then what are potentially some future regulatory changes that might be coming down the pipe. So first off, about the life history of black bears in Prince William Sound. Basically, we find them a lot in forests, but they also use coastal sedge meadows, avalanche chutes, alpine meadows. Those are all important areas for them. They're easily distinguishable most of the time from brown bears because they have short, sharp claws that make it easier for them to climb trees. They look different from the profile. They lack that big hump on their shoulder. Their faces are a little bit different shaped. They have a smaller body size, and then if you get the skulls in hand, you can tell the difference based on some of their molar characteristics. And so, because you can sometimes have really black brown bears and really brown black bears, so the conclusive determination is by their teeth, if it comes to that. We don't have very many black bears that are non-black color phases in Prince William Sound, so we don't have glacier bears or cinnamon bears very often at all. Sometimes we get different configurations with a little bit of white on them, and more than others, but usually they're just straight up black. For reproduction, they mate in between June and August. Generally, they're delayed implanters, so the egg doesn't actually implant and start developing until the fall. They produce between 1 and 4 cubs, but usually it's 2. And we started wondering how productive sows are in Prince William Sound. So Dave Crowley knew that if you sent in the teeth to the place that ages them and you asked them, they would do a reproductive reconstruction based on the teeth, because you can tell based on changes with the annuli that they put down whether or not a sow had cubs. Well, it turns out you can't tell in Prince William Sound because our bears have such a stable food source that there's just basically no variation, and you can't tell when they had cubs. So we really don't know how productive our sows are in Prince William Sound, but we think they're very, very productive because they're pretty food secure bears. So speaking of food, what do they eat? Well, they're always opportunistic. In the early spring, they like to eat the freshly sprouted green vegetation that's often found on these coastal sedge meadows and then in avalanche chutes. In the summer and the fall, they switch more to salmon and berries. And it's important to note that in Prince William Sound, terrestrial meat makes up almost none of their diet. So we don't think that black bears are eating very much deer or anything but really salmon, berries, and roots and things like that, but really no terrestrial meat to speak of. And that's determined based on a study that was done in the 70s that just didn't really find anything else. So that's different than other parts of the state where we manage black bears for lower abundance because we're worried about their predation on like moose calves. We don't have to worry about that in Prince William Sound. We don't have moose, and they're just not consuming terrestrial meat. As for denning, they go in the fall. It's related primarily to photo period. They can use rock cavities, they can use hollow trees, or they can dig holes. And generally the first ones to emerge are the males or the lone bears. One interesting thing though is in the past we've tweaked season dates to try to deal with percent take of females in the harvest. And you never see a change in the percent females taken with date, with chronology. So I don't know if they really are coming out of their dens, the males earlier than females, because we sure never pick it up in the harvest data like that. Black bears are pretty important to the ecosystem because, like brown bears, they eat salmon, and salmon bring a lot of marine-derived nutrients into a terrestrial ecosystem. So a bear catches that fish, it moves the fish physically from the river oftentimes, or it just deposits those marine-derived nutrients as scat. And that feeds the system and makes the whole system more productive. So plants, when they have marine-derived nutrients, just produce more leaves and have more productive growth. So the graphic over here shows you that when you have bears in an ecosystem, you have forests that yield larger woody debris. The woody debris provides shelter for fry, productive rearing habitat for smolts. Smolt production is high, and then you have more abundant returns of smoked salmon. So conversely, if you don't have bears in the system, you have less large woody debris, less shelter for fry, less productive rearing habitat, smolt production is low, and fewer salmon are returning in that scenario. So fewer bears equals less nutrient deposition, less productive plants, less productive ecosystem. And that's kind of one of the roles that they play. So, but black bears are also important to the economy. They're the second most pursued species in Prince William Sound. They're second only to deer. And statewide, they're the third most sought after species for hunting, the fifth most sought after species for wildlife viewing. And this is based on a study that was done on the economic importance of wildlife in 2014. Looking at what dollar value hunting contributes, I looked at the harvest data and I calculated, well, we have a 5-year average, annual average of 800 hunters. Then I looked at the breakdown of that by residency and figured out how much all it would cost a resident for licenses and fees, how much it costs a resident for a license. And then I calculated based on how many people use transporters, how many people use guides, and how many people did self-supported hunts, and estimates for each of those types of hunts. And I did all the math, and I put it all together, and it totaled over $830,000 just on black bear hunting in Prince William Sound. On the wildlife viewing side, we can't parse out the number specifically on people who want to see black bears, because people just want to see animals when they go wildlife viewing. We don't know if they're looking for whales or seals or bears or whatever. But we know that an estimated 600 to 700 people per day during the peak months are going through Whittier for the purposes of wildlife viewing. And they spend between $80 and $100 for their experience. So you do the math there, which I did, and it means more than $5.5 million spent in Prince William Sound on wildlife viewing. In South Central Alaska, the same study on the economic value of wildlife found, and so South Central Alaska includes Anchorage, it includes Portage Glacier, the Kenai, and everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but everywhere that's South Central, including Prince William Sound, wildlife visitors spent $431 million. So Prince William Sound is obviously a part of that. It's probably somewhere between 5.5 and that 431 million. So that's how I came up with some of those numbers. Black bears are difficult to estimate. Because they live in old growth forests, it's really hard to tell what you have going on. And they're just difficult to estimate in general. It would involve extensive collaring efforts or DNA marker captures. And when budgets are tight, they basically lose out to animals that are more commonly thought of as table fare. Lots of people eat black bears, but when it comes right down to it, moose and caribou get the money. So we haven't had money to do any kind of black bear estimate, but Mona Ferry was a scientist who worked in Prince William Sound on black bears in the 70s. And he estimated we had about 500 black bears per 1,000 square kilometers in the Western Sound. Other estimates range from 400 to 1,000 bears per 1,000 kilometers. Black bears are generally believed to have increased during the 1990s due to increased hatchery salmon production. Dave Crowley estimated an overall density of 600 bears per 1,000 square kilometers, and that would be a total of about 3,700 bears. But since the early 2000s, stakeholders have nearly unanimously, and that includes guides, transporters, non-consumptive users, and researchers of other species of Prince William Sound, have expressed concern that the population is declining, and it's declined throughout western Prince William Sound. So just to demonstrate that I don't think this decline is salmon-driven, I included this graphic that I got from the Comfish guys over at Fish and Game to show the changes in salmon abundance in Prince William Sound over time. So we have more fish than we used to, and those bears probably have plenty to eat. So what is causing that decline? Well, our user landscape certainly has changed. The Exxon Valdez oil spill increased the awareness of the resources around Prince William Sound when that happened in 1989. Another change is the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, which a lot of people call Whittier Road, opened to light vehicle traffic in June of 2000. So you can see before 2000, you had to load a car and a boat onto the train, and about 20,000 vehicles were transported that way. And then you open it to where people can just drive, and now you got 80,000. Ultimately, it grows to over 100,000, and now it's settled out at around 100,000. Spring trips to Prince William Sound are really popular. It's the first time you can get out and go hunting after a long winter, and people like to do multi-purpose trips. So they like to set out some shrimp pots and fish for halibut and rockfish, and then, what the heck, I'll see if I can get a black bear at the same time. Black bears are prized for both their hides and their meat, so you'll find hunters that begrudgingly take the meat in the spring. Everybody's required to sell their meat in the spring, but there are some that do it begrudgingly, and there are some that it's their favorite meat to harvest. And then there's everything in between. So, let's talk about some of the management objectives. I looked back today and discovered that we've had this management objective of a minimum of 200 black bears in the harvest since 1987, or somewhere around that time. And I'll show you in a minute our harvest graphs. We've certainly changed things since back then. But we never set a maximum. Even as the number of bears that were taken every year was climbing through the roof, we never said how many bears is too many to take. And so every year since 1999, we've exceeded that, or we've met this goal of a minimum of 200 bears. And then that guideline's been doubled in 5 years, and it's been tripled in 7 years. So check on that objective. Less than 20, our goal is for less than 25% of females to be in the harvest. And so of your harvest, less than 25% of those are females. We've exceeded that goal in all but 3 years since 2001. And this 25% taken females is the objective that pretty much all coastal managers in Alaska shoot for, because bears are seen as a desired species. A minimum average male skull size of 17 inches, and so that's the width and the length combined. And we've only hit that 9 out of 20 years. So now I'll give you a little regulatory history. Well, remember when I said 200 bears? So this is 1993. I don't even go back to 1987 on here. But you can see before this time, before 1997, we were well below that 200 objective. And then things started to climb as we get to this time period where the Whittier Tunnel opens. That's what that star represents. So things really started to climb, and they kind of dropped and settled perhaps a little bit, and then really took off. So in 1973, the first thing that happened is we started the mandatory sealing of hides. Second thing that happened is in 2003, people started getting concerned about wounding loss. Black bears are a species that experiences a high amount of wounding loss. They're pretty durable animals, and it's surprising what they can live through, at least initially. So we said you couldn't shoot from a boat in 2003. So the harvest, even though they had that rule that said you couldn't shoot from a boat in 2003, the harvest was still climbing. Then 2004, 5, 6, 7. So then in 2005, we started trimming the season, cut the season by 20 days, set up a requirement that you had to take a bear baiting clinic if you were going to bait bears, and then close certain areas of Prince William Sound to bear baiting altogether to reduce conflict between non-consumptive users and hunters. But we still had that climb in between 2005 and 2007, and things started to drop off, but people were still concerned. So in 2009, the season was shortened by 10 more days. Also in 2009, we started using the harvest ticket system to track our harvest data. So you can tell that our harvest was climbing. Our harvest has pretty much declined steadily since that time. So you may be wondering, like, how much of this change is regulatory? It has to do with seasons being shortened and whatnot. We've also had some severe, weird weather events. Like this last year was pretty weird. Pretty early spring. The year before that was kind of a late spring. This is snowpocalypse here. So we had some weird weather going on. Some of that could be playing into. But the most concerning thing that we're seeing is the percent take of females. So this percent take of females is climbing up through the roof. And you may be wondering, why is that concerning? Well, a high proportion of your females in any given year is not supposed to be available because they're going to have cubs with them. And so you wouldn't be able to shoot those animals. Also, your males are supposed to be more conspicuous, so because they're aggressively pursuing food or mates or territory. And then when you start to have more females showing up in the harvest, what that can mean is that the longevity of your females is really starting to play in to what animals are available for hunters. So female bears live longer, they just have more years to get hunted. And if you're not replacing male bears, you start to be weighted towards females. And I mentioned the coastal areas we shoot for less than 25% females. So here's what happens when you put the two together. You see our climbing harvest, and then you see it start to drop, and then when these converge, and your percentage of females continues to climb, and you're just on a steady downslide, this is what has us worried. Dave Crowley calculated a harvest rate in 2007 at that highest point of about 15%, and that was based on a theoretical population of 3,700 bears. When you add in a wounding loss percentage of 15 to 25%, which is pretty much standard what people estimate, that's a 17 to 19% harvest rate. and 11 to 13% is generally what we consider to be sustainable. So, what other information do we have? Well, we have tooth data from ceiling records, but we actually only have those since 2004. It's not standard to collect teeth from black bears. It's kind of expensive to get them aged. We can't really observe a trend just looking at average ages of harvested bears. Male bears are about 6 to 7 years old, female bears about 9 years old, and we just have too many gaps in the data because there are long stretches of time where we weren't collecting teeth at all, or a few times when we were collecting them for research purposes, but for the most part, no continuity, and we can't really do a before-after analysis. We've always collected skull size, so what about that? Skull sizes are also pretty inconclusive. They bounce around pretty wildly, but these bear researchers in 1987, working in the lower 48, they told us this would happen because they had a population of bears that they knew what it was. They had it very thoroughly studied, they had collars out on animals, and they were very reliably able to tell how many animals they had in the population. So then they took their harvest data and they said, can we take our age data, can we take our skull size data, and can we simulate through modeling what's happening in the actual population? And they could never do it reliably. And so that brought into question whether or not skull size and age can ever really be useful metrics to help us manage populations or anticipate when they're going down. But the one thing they said in that study that was a reliable indicator is the percent take of females. So then we're back to our previous slide. You may be wondering how the harvest is distributed. It's definitely not evenly throughout Prince William Sound. About 75% to 90% from the Western Sound. And the habitat's just basically better there. There are fewer brown bears to prey on them. But the proximity to Whittier is probably one of the biggest driving factors. So we see here, this is a little tough to read, but right about here is where the Whittier tunnel opens. And you see this red line is Esther and Ewood. It's this area right here. You can see how much that took off. Other hot spots, this purple line is Passage and Whittier, so that includes Culross. And Night is this green streak here. And Southwest Prince William Sound is this orange one. So it's probably getting traffic both from Seward side and this area right here. From Seward side and possibly from Whittier too. This is just another way of looking at that. The red are your hot spots, the green are the areas with lower number of kills per square miles. So what do we know about effort? So we've got these harvest tickets starting in 2009. We can start to use those to estimate how many people are pursuing bears. But harvest tickets are challenging data. We find that about 10% or more of the people who actually killed the bear, and we know they killed the bear because they sealed it like they were supposed to, actually report on their harvest ticket they didn't go hunting at all. And so now we have to go back in and we have to reconcile between their harvest tickets and their sealing, and it just requires a whole bunch of cleanup. So what I know is that this 2013 number is only going to go up for hunters right here. This is a low number right now because it hasn't been cleaned, and we know it's going to go up. But harvest tickets have problems, but they're still the best information that we have on effort. What about success rates? Well, if your decline in harvest is truly driven by effort, so there are just less people going hunting, and that's why you have less killed bears, then you would expect that your success rates would either be stable or they'd be going up, right? Because every hunter has fewer people to compete with. If the number of bears is the same, then each hunter should be that much more successful. Well, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing success rates that are tanking. And again, some of that could be weather-driven, but I don't think it's all weather-driven. I think another part of what's going on is that effort can be driven by the law of diminished return. So when your population was high and you had a shrimp pot and you had your fishing rods and you had your black bear harvest ticket and you had your gun, you'd be setting out your shrimp pots, you'd maybe see a bear on the beach, you'd go stalk it, and bada bing, bada boom. But now you're putting out your shrimp pots and you're fishing. You may never see a bear, so you never really get out of the boat. Maybe you walk around a little bit, but you never see a bear. Do you count when you go home your activity as hunting? The fewer bears that you see, the less likely you probably are to consider what you did as hunting. And that's my theory, but the law of diminished return and how that affects the accuracy of harvest reports. So other people have said, well, black bear effort statewide is going down. People just aren't pursuing as many black bears. So I looked at the effort across different game units that are coastal. And I found that in most areas, effort's stable. In a couple areas it's gone down. This blue line here is our line for 6D, Prince William Sound. But for the most part, it's pretty stable. We can't use that really as an excuse. But if you look at how many bears are being killed across those units, you do see some declines across different areas. And that suggests to me that what we have going on is probably not entirely hunter-driven. We could have some things going on just in nature that are driving black bear numbers down, but I don't think that's all what's driving black numbers down. I think it's possible that we've depressed our population to a point that then when we get a big weather event, it can't withstand as much of that and just has more problems. So yeah, the decline in Prince William Sound is among the steepest. Some people have asked, well, what if the bears are just getting smarter, but not really the sow bears? What if the sow bears aren't getting smarter, and that's why they're getting killed more, but the male bears aren't getting smarter? And I'm trying not to read the veiled misogynist argument that's in there somewhere, but basically we've seen evidence that animals can use risk avoidance, but we've never found that to be sex specific. And generally, if somebody's going to figure something out, it's the sows, because they live longer and have more years to amass an education. So if you know of a paper that shows that sows are dumber than boars, send it my way, but I haven't found it yet.
Just with bears.
So here's some questions that we hope to answer with some future research. Is the harvest of black bears in Prince William Sound sustainable? Recognizing that bears are important to the ecosystem, what's an acceptable level of harvest? How many bears are there? And what's the population trend been in the past? So are we high relative to what we've been, or are we low relative to where we've been? So there are a couple ways we need to look at this. One is with a DNA-based marker capture study. So this work would be led by two researchers with Fish and Game out of Anchorage. Sean Farley is one and Tony Carnahan is another. And they would acquire a DNA mark on a bear using either a hair snare or a biopsy dart. And they can use the information that they get from that to then see how many of those DNA marked bears, or how many of the bears that we already have this little snippet of their DNA, show up again in the sealing records. So you can use that to calculate an exploitation rate. We can also use the information from their DNA to figure out dispersal and relatedness between bears, and we can use it to identify sources and sinks within the population. The other thing I came into is a treasure trove of old teeth, about 1,200 old teeth that were collected but never aged, and we were able to extract genetics from those teeth, and we can do some of these analysis on them. Another thing we can do is age those teeth, plug them into what's called an age class population reconstruction, and we can use that in the fashion that people who forecast fish returns can do. They can take what you know about the ages of animals in any given year and use that to go in either direction to reconstruct your population. So these are some of the things we're going to do to try to figure out what we've got. But what can we do while we wait for those research results to come? Right now we have a regulatory framework that's pretty much wide open. You just use a general statewide harvest ticket. You can print one from your home computer. You could go home and do it right now. Those are less apt to accurately capture our effort data because there's no limit on participation. They're not Prince William Sound specific. You don't know if someone's going to go hunt on the Upper Kobuk River or if they're going to hunt in Prince William Sound. There's a really slow response time because they have 30 days to seal a bear. And so basically I don't find out about more than, I think this year I knew only about 30% of the harvest a month and a half until, I didn't know how much harvest I had till a month and a half after the season closed. So there's nothing you can do in season to respond to changes in hunt pressure, distribution, or abundance. If you were going to do an emergency order closure, you'd have to decide that before the season started. And that's probably what's going to happen this year, is I'll have an emergency order closure that carves a couple weeks off of the end of the spring season. But that's not a long-term solution, that's a short-term solution. What would be a long-term solution? Well, it would be better if we had a way to track effort and have faster reporting. So that would mean acquiring a permit that's specific to Prince William Sound and documents your intent to hunt there. We could limit participation if needed, so if we only wanted to issue a certain number of permits, we could do that. Harvest and effort data would be collected more accurately and timely because you could say you have to report within 3 days of kill or 5 days of kill. And then also there'd be failure to report regulations if you don't get your hunt report turned in. It would allow me a faster response time. So I could use an emergency order in season because harvest data would be better. And then it would involve maximum flexibility. So if very few people are going hunting and very few bears are dying, you don't have to close the season. But if you get the floodgates open up and tons of people go and the conditions are perfect and they're killing lots of bears, you can respond to that. And then participants can be easily notified if the season changes. There are some other ideas that are being kicked around. One would be to say, well, you can only kill one bear every 3 years or every 4 years. But that assumes there's a significant number of repeat hunters. Last year, only 26 bears would have been saved if we had a 1 bear every 3-year regulation, about a 14% reduction. The average harvest reduction would be 12% a year. And it could affect the people that are meat hunters. I don't know how to really get to the bottom of how many hunters that would be, but it could. If you take, another idea is if you take a sow, you can't shoot another bear for 4 years. That again assumes a significant number of repeat hunters. It would have only prevented 8 to 18 hunters from going again in future years, and again it could affect your meat hunters. Another idea is tweaking the season dates. And I've even had people kicking out ideas of tweaking those fall dates some more. And so I showed you here, the blue are how many bears are taken in the fall. And you can tell in the past it was a little bit more significant, but right now if I started tweaking fall season dates, it's really not going to make very much of a difference. We do take more females in the fall, but the overall take of females is still just a drop in the bucket because it's less than 20% of the overall harvest. So I think tweaking season dates makes you inflexible to weather and changes in the population. And then it also kind of just condenses hunters. They're still going to go hunting, they're just going to go hunting earlier. So it doesn't necessarily reduce participation. And we can see that because we tweaked the season dates in 2005. And what happened? Well, things still continue to go up. So that's why I don't favor that option. But what if nothing changes and we just continue with our current framework? Well, I believe that that black bear hunting will remain popular, but hunters will continue to have difficulty finding bears. They'll continue to have difficulty finding trophy bears. The population will remain depressed. Wildlife viewers won't get to see as many bears as they'd like to see. And ultimately, the ecosystem could suffer from depressed bear populations. So with that, I'll take any questions.